We are ready to rumble. Well. Welcome to MonstaTV. I am Fred, your friendly neighborhood alien, 100% red-pilled and totally and utterly politically incorrect. Okay, today we're going to talk about slavery and the reason for why we have black fatigue in all of the societies across the world, and we just have enough of blacks altogether. Which is kind of strange because there's an awful lot of cool black people, and we're going to introduce one right now, a black man called Thomas Sowell. Now this guy has written about slavery and has talked about slavery. He was quite an intellectual and a really interesting man. And we're going to have a look at an excerpt from one of his books. I think the name of the book is written here. Oh yeah, okay. And then we're going to have another look at how come this kind of strange black culture that we see in America and, you know, spreading from America into the world, and these stupid black people, right, that can't talk proper English and that are all macho and, you know, this really crazy shit that nobody wants to deal with and nobody wants to have near them. And we don't know where it's coming from. What is this? Now, Thomas Sowell wrote a book called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Really interesting stuff. So we have an excerpt from that now, and we're going to have to take a listen to it. So here we go. Let's go. Yeah, untold facts about slavery.
The instrumental use of the history of slavery today also underlies the claim that slavery grew out of racism. For most of its long history, which includes most of the history of the human race, slavery was largely not the enslavement of racially different people, for the simple reason that only in recent centuries has either the technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean.
En masse, of course. But the point is that obviously we enslaved ourselves, right? Because we weren't traveling like huge distances across the world, so we enslaved the weaker people around us. Simple as that. And it goes back thousands of years.
People were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked. The peoples of the Balkans were enslaved by fellow Europeans, as well as by the peoples of the Middle East, for at least 6 centuries before the first African was brought to the Western Hemisphere.
600 years, by
before the modern era. By and large, Europeans enslaved other Europeans. Asians enslaved other Asians. Africans enslaved other Africans. And the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Slavery was not based on race, much less on theories about race. Only relatively late in history did enslavement across racial lines occur on such a scale as to promote an ideology of racism that outlasted the institution of slavery itself. Wherever a separate people were enslaved, they were disdained or despised, whether they were different by country, religion, caste, race, or tribe. In East Africa, the Maasai were feared slave raiders, and other African tribes, either alone or in conjunction with Arabs, enslaved their more vulnerable neighbors. As late as 1891, it was reported that Manyuema slavers had demoralized surrounding tribes, destroying crops, and famine reigned everywhere. Even in the early 20th century, Abyssinians were still raiding other Africans and carrying off slaves. It was 1922 before the British had gained sufficient control in Tanganyika to stamp out slavery there. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. The total number of slaves exported from East Africa during the 19th century has been estimated to be at least 2 million. The form in which the story of slavery has reached most people today has been along the lines of the best-selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley. Challenged on the historical accuracy of Roots, Haley said, "I tried to give my people a myth to live by."
Wow. He just lied to black people. He just lied to them and gave them the possibility of being victims forever. Poor victims. And they are the most vile pieces of shit that actually are walking around the planet at the moment. Not black people in general, these type of black people.
Instrumental use of history, or purported history, is open to the same objections as other instrumental myth-making. Despite the impression created by roots, during the era of the massive slave trade from West Africa, a white man was more likely to catch malaria in Africa than to catch slaves himself. The average life expectancy of a white man in the interior of sub-Saharan Africa at that time was less than 1 year. By and large, men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere came to the coasts of Africa, bought their slaves, and left as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves.
Now let that sink in. Because of sicknesses and all the rest of that, the white people that were like on the ship, on the slave ship, they died in the same numbers as slaves died on the slave ship. Imagine that.
It was only much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there. But by then, the Atlantic slave trade had already been ended. During the era of that trade, Africa was largely ruled by Africans, who established the conditions under which slave sales took place.
Oh, now that's interesting. Black people selling other black people and defining the conditions under which those sales can take place. That's interesting, isn't it? Isn't it?
The crew of a slave ship was in no position to defy African rulers and their armies by going out across the land and capturing people willy-nilly. The stronger African peoples captured and enslaved the weaker peoples. The same pattern found over the centuries in Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, and Polynesia. In Nyasaland, the Ngoni and Yao swaggered over and terrorized other tribes. In Uganda, the Baganda made life miserable for their neighbors. And the Nyoro and Hima of Anko enslaved Toro women and children. The Tutsi dominated the Hutu in Rwanda, the Maasai lorded it over the Kikuyu and Kamba, and the latter, in turn, held the Indorobo in a kind of serfdom. It was precisely the fact that Europeans, except for the Portuguese, seldom participated in the raids that captured and enslaved Africans that enabled most people in Europe and the Americas to remain oblivious to the traumatic experience that this was.
So, most of Europe had nothing to do with slaves at all. They bought slaves from other slave traders as normal at the time, but they had no... they were oblivious, as he says here. They didn't even know, like, how the slaves were captured or, what happened until they bought a slave.
With some Africans committing suicide to avoid capture and wives being whipped as they tried to cling to their husbands or children. Historian David Breon Davis pointed out that Europeans had little contact with the actual process of enslavement, and that, as late as 1721, the Royal African Company asked its agents to investigate the modes of enslavement in the interior. Europeans typically saw only the end results, enslaved people being offered for sale on the coast. It was much the same story in the Ottoman Empire, where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before.
Yeah, it's just like when you go into a shop and you buy anything at all. You don't know how it was made, you didn't go to the factory, you didn't actually see the products getting made or processed. And it's the same thing here. They came to the coast and they had a marketplace there for slaves, and then you just bought your slave. I'm not saying any of this is good, of course. What I'm saying is that's how the contact to what the process was. Zero.
The unique position of the Western world in the history, and especially the destruction of slavery, need not imply that there was unanimity within the West on this institution. In addition to whites who defended the enslavement of Africans on racial grounds, or who opposed general emancipation on social grounds, there were many whites, and even blacks, who defended slavery as a matter of self-interest as slave owners.
And those were Democrats, by the way. Democrats.
Although most black owners of slaves in the United States were only nominal owners of members of their own families, there were thousands of other blacks in the antebellum South who were commercial slave owners, just like their white counterparts.
Did he just say thousands? Like, shall we have a look at that again? Just see what he actually said there.
Who were commercial slave owners, just like their members of their own families. There were thousands of other blacks in the antebellum South who were commercial slave owners, just like their white counterparts.
Let it sink in. Like, I'm not ever going to have any of this white guilt crap ever again. Okay?
An estimated 1/3 of the free persons of color in New Orleans were slave owners, and thousands of these slave owners volunteered to fight for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Black slave owners were even more common in the Caribbean. In short, there were many defenders of slavery in the West, even in the 19th century. And outside the West, slavery was too widely accepted to require defense. No other nation ended slavery in the same way as the United States did, and few ended it after so short a struggle, as history is measured. How and why did slavery end in most of the world? There were two major processes. Over the centuries, as more and more territories around the world consolidated into nation-states with their own armies and navies, raiding those territories to capture and enslave the people who lived within them became more hazardous in itself, and also risked military retaliation against the countries from which the raiders came.
So, we do not want globalism, right? Because we don't want slaves. And all globalism, it just wants to go back to the slave trade. You can be damn sure of it.
Thus, more and more peoples became off-limits to slave raiders over time. Put differently, the areas which remained subject to slave raiding over the centuries were primarily those where the people lived in smaller or weaker societies. Such societies continued to exist where it was difficult, for geographic or other reasons, to consolidate large areas under one government. This was true of the Balkans, the backwaters of Asia, and much of sub-Saharan Africa. By the early modern era, sub-Saharan Africa, with its numerous and severe geographic handicaps, was one of the last remaining areas from which vast numbers of people could be enslaved.
Well, that's quite interesting, isn't it? If you think about that kind of stuff. It is absolutely amazing what kind of crap you've been told about the whole topic of slavery, and it only concerning blacks. Not true in the least, and blacks were slave owners just as much. Well, not just as much in America, not just as much in Europe, obviously, because those are white countries, but they were just as much slave owners in their own countries. This is quite amazing. Now let's get to something else, because we're just going to keep going. We're going to listen to this, and we're going to have a breakdown of some of the stuff that was happening. Now we have somebody here, a professor, by these two guys at trigonometry, and he's going to tell us something about slavery. His name is Nigel Bigar, and a 5-minute kind of, thing of what he's saying about slavery.
13% of the total manpower of the Royal Navy was devoted to stopping slave ships leaving West Africa for the Americas. Just stopping that, quite apart from stopping slavery elsewhere. Slavery and trading in slaves was a universal institution almost from the dawn of time.
Almost from the dawn of time, all the way across the planet. I mean, like where people were.
So long before Europeans got into it, and the Portuguese were the first in the 1440s, in terms of trading in Africans. Although there was slavery. I mean, Bristol was a slave market in the medieval period. Irish slaves being traded to Norsemen, who then took them down the Volga to the Black Sea. So there's lots of slave trading around Europe, but also Africans were involved in trading other Africans as slaves to the Romans, and then to the Muslim Arabs.
Yeah.
The Comanche, the Amerindian people who dwelt in the southwest of what's now the United States, according to one eminent historian, ran a vast slave economy in the 1700s.
Yeah, and then you had the Incas, and you had the Aztecs, and you had the Maya. All of them had slaves, and they all enslaved other American Indians.
And then in the 1700s in Jamaica, when slaves escaped from the plantations and went into the forested interior, the mountainous interior of Jamaica, they were called Maroons. They often held slaves of their own.
Escaped slaves holding slaves of their own.
And I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, in January, visiting my wife's family there, and I went to the Museum of the History of North Carolina, which told me that on the eve of the American Civil War in 1860, there were 30,000 freed slaves in the state of North Carolina, some of whom owned slaves of their own. And my point is, we have to accept the fact that for many people, even former slaves, owning slaves was acceptable.
Normal. It was like having workers. If you have a farm, a little farm, usually what you would do is you would see to it that you have a bigger family, right? You want lots of sons to work the farm with you. And that's how you expand the farm and you make it bigger. At a certain stage, you will need workers on your farm. Now, how did that work? Well, you could pay them. Slaves, you couldn't just have slaves and you didn't give them anything. So they would just die and starve. So you'd have to feed them, you'd have to house them, and they work for you. It's just that you forced them to work for you. And I'm not downplaying any of this. And what I'm trying to say is like the type of strange logic that was in all of that for like thousands of years in every culture with every person. There was no liberal that was there saying, oh, that's bad. No, as soon as the liberal, and it's the same for communism, it's the same for these people today as well, as soon as they're capable, they will have slaves of their own. The reason for why we have no slaves in the West anymore is kind of shocking for most black people and liberals, who want to say that white people are such bad people.
Or normal. And even if you might well, if you were in the 18th century, 19th century, you might well object to cruel and inhuman forms of slavery, and yet still think that slavery was a kind of a fact of life. So we just have to accept that and get our heads around it. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone until us was morally corrupt and morally insensitive. So that's one thing. So there was nothing exceptional about the British involvement in slavery in the 17th and 18th centuries. What was exceptional and extraordinary was that toward the end of the 18th century, partly because of Enlightenment views, mainly because of Christian views.
Did you hear that? Enlightenment views, Christian views, mainly because of that, he's going to tell us what was kind of special about the English, let's say the white involvement in the whole topic of slavery. What was exceptionally different about white people having slaves?
Christian views, the idea that owning other human beings as property began to be questioned on principle. And so in 1787 you get the creation of the Society for the Abolition of Slavery in England. I think Denmark was the first state in Europe to abolish the slave trade within its limited territories. Britain followed 3 years later, 1807. And then in 1833, the empire abolished slavery as an institution within its territories. So let me just make this clear, because at the moment, in recent years, we've been encouraged in Britain to look again at the horrors of slavery in which our ancestors were involved for 150, 200 years, as if nothing had changed. So the fact that Britain was among the first states in the history of the world let's say it again. to abolish the slave trade and then to abolish slavery. First states in the history of the world. To abolish.
I love the way he says that. So, like, do you understand? It wasn't black people at all who stopped slavery. Black people still have slavery in Africa. It's still there.
Britain was among the first states in the history of the world.
Yes.
To abolish the slave trade and then to abolish slavery. And it then led the world in suppressing both of those, as I said, from Brazil across Africa to Malaysia. That was extraordinary. No other state had done that before. No other states had done that before. Certainly not in Africa, certainly not in Asia, nor among the indigenous peoples of North America. That was extraordinary. And we carried on doing that until the end of the empire in the 1960s. And in the 1820s and 30s, the Slave Trade Department in the British Foreign Office was the largest unit. And in the 1830s or 40s, thereabouts, 13% of the total manpower of the Royal Navy was devoted to stopping slave ships leaving West Africa for the Americas. Just stopping that, quite apart from stopping slavery elsewhere.
13% of their entire navy.
So I do think we need to remember the fact that we couldn't undo what we'd done for 200 years worth of enslaving. All we could do was stop it and then try and stop it elsewhere.
Interesting. Which is the point is, like, I'd like to see other people try and look in their history how they stopped slavery. How they did that. Like how the blacks stopped slavery. They didn't do shit to stop slavery, okay? But they're completely and utterly, yes, of course, they are the ones that are the only ones suffering slavery. So we're going to go into the next topic here about what people might argue when it comes to the slavery, the sales of slaves and the whole trade of slaves and industry of slaves in America, what was going on there, and facts and things that are completely forgotten. That white people were enslaved in America as well, okay? And people just tend to forget that. So we're going to have a look at Irish slaves. We're just going to go through this stuff, and then we're going to have a look and listen to a part of Thomas Sowell's book and somebody who tells us about it a bit. Let's see.
Some groups deny the Irish slavery under English and later British rule, claiming that this was nothing more than voluntary indentured servitude, which did exist. However, there are counter-arguments that will be challenged here. There is a legitimate dispute as to the numbers enslaved, especially during the 17th century before the Act of Union in 1707. The official British legal terminology used was indentured servants.
Okay, that's the left does it all the time. They use more positive sounding words for the terrible things that they do. Rather than killing babies in the womb, it's called abortion, right? And you don't call it a baby, you call it a fetus, okay? Now, it's not like oppression of the few and oppress everybody else. No, they call it communism. We're all a commune, right? Causing complete social destruction is called socialism. Oh, we're so social. Disgusting.
Whether the servants in question had willingly signed the indenture contract to emigrate to the Americas or were first to go. Many were forced. Therefore, those transported unwillingly and effectively sold were not considered to be indentured. This included political prisoners, vagrants, convicts, political activists, thieves, prostitutes.
So what they did was they enslaved prisoners, right? People, criminals of all sorts. So yeah, they did that and they do it today as well. So that's nothing new and it hasn't changed.
Or people who had been defined as undesirable by the English government. The Irish introduction to slavery was during the first Viking raids in the year 795.
You must think about this, like the Irish, what they have endured is quite something. On that tiny little island there off the coast of England, it is just incredible. I know Ireland. I grew up in Ireland. So, wow.
Lasting through the mid-9th century. This period saw the Irish killed and enslaved. just like many other societies, the Vikings attacked. Most of these early raids were along the northern and eastern coast using hit-and-run tactics. The Vikings would then flee with treasure and slaves and return to either their holdings in Scotland or back to Norway.
Well, the Irish, especially the Irish priests or convents and so on, they made incredible, beautiful art out of gold and bronze and everything.
Usually, many slaves who were of value were ransomed back to their families, but others remained in captivity.
That, by the way, is something that happened on the south coast of Europe with the Ottomans and the barbarians. They captured white slaves all over Europe, right at the bottom of Europe, if you want, Italy all the way to Spain and so on. And they would ransom them back as well. But usually they wanted to keep the women. Anyway, I mean, they just kept fucking slaves because slavery was something normal. And that's the thing that we're trying to get to. That there was nothing special about the slavery of black people at all.
Then, from the year 837 onward, larger targets such as the greater monastic towns of Armagh, Glendalough, Kildare, Slane, Clonard, and Clonmacnoise, and Lismore were hit by larger forces. These large-scale raids generally spared the smaller local churches and villages far inland, but slaves were still taken, mostly to Scotland and Iceland. In 875, Irish slaves in Iceland launched Europe's largest slave rebellion since the end of the Roman Empire, when Hrólfr Hólmarsson's slaves killed him and fled to Vestmannaeyjar. In 841, the port that became known as Dublin was taken and occupied by both Olaf and Ivar the Boneless. And by 853, this part of Ireland was a Norse trading center, and slaves were a large part of it.
Can you imagine? And now they're doing it all over again. They're occupying Ireland with all these Muslims and all these Negroes, and the Irish are letting it happen once again. I mean, now a couple of things have happened in Ireland, and the Irish are starting to revolt all over again. Again, it has to be done, that the Irish take back their country. It's just amazing, isn't it?
The slave trade did not stop with Ivar's death in 873. Finally, in 902, driven out of Dublin by the combined forces of Brega and Leinster, but the Vikings came back in 914 and reclaimed all the territory, taking more slaves. But Irish resistance was not over. In 980, the Irish, under Mael Sechnal Mac Domhnall, king of Meath, fought and managed to defeat the Vikings and freed all of their slaves. Some Vikings who remained assimilated and adapted to Christianity and became part of Irish society.
That's how early and how far back Christianity goes in Ireland. It goes all the way back. And yes, and they said about the Vikings that assimilated, they became more Irish than the Irish themselves. That's the thing that we always heard in school.
The final nail in the coffin regarding Vikings holding land and taking slaves was in 1014 at the Battle of Clontarf, when Brian Boru, High King of Ireland, attacked Dublin, aided by his allies, the Limerick Vikings. They fought other Irish allied to the local Vikings in Dublin, and Boru's force won, and all the slaves were again freed, thus ending the legacy of constant Norse raids, whether from Danes or Norwegians. The period forced enslavement and severity ended a century after the Norman invasion of England in October 1066. Subsequent Norman rulers of England eyed Ireland, and slavery in its true form was abolished in 1102. In 1155, Pope Adrian IV supposedly gave Henry II of England a papal bull, granting the king the authority to invade Ireland. However, many historians believe that this authorization was a forgery.
Well, I would want to believe that too, because like, who the fuck are you to just give away Ireland to the English? That's ridiculous. But those are the kind of things that monarchs and, in this case, like religious leaders and stuff like that, always allow themselves to do. And that's why it's it's a good thing to keep them in fear of the public rather than the other way around. A government always needs to fear its people.
Regardless, Henry II of England faced excommunication for the murder of Thomas à Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, so it is possible. However, Adrian's successor, Pope Alexander III, granted the lands of Ireland to Henry II, although it was not his land to give. The Norman conquest of England and Ireland were cataclysmic events that would shape Ireland's as well as world history. and create tensions with England for the next 800 years. The Normans were initially invited to Ireland by Dermot MacMurrough, the deposed King of Leinster. He is sometimes referred to as Dermot of the Foreigners, and his grandmother was the granddaughter of Brian Boru. In October 1171, King Henry II landed in Ireland and allowed Dermot to recruit soldiers and mercenaries, as Ireland was made up of several kingdoms at war with each other. The city of Dublin and the surrounding area were under Norman occupation and would be called the Pale, or the safe zone. Going beyond that was considered foolish, hence the term we use today, going beyond the pale. But the Normans ended the practice of slavery in Ireland, but not serfdom, for at least a few hundred years. Despite the Norman abolishment of slavery, serfdom was still alive and well. Serfs were, unlike slaves, bound to the land, and the land meant everything. So selling people into slavery would have left no one to farm and conduct agriculture.
I see. There you go. The modern day worker is the same thing as a slave, because you will get nothing done if you didn't have workers. And that's why they want communism, so they can shit on the workers, right? Because if you have capitalism, you have to treat your workers well, or they kick your fucking arse.
Following the Battle of Kinsale, in 1601, when the Irish and Spanish alliance was defeated, the Irish aristocracy fled to Europe, but the commoners remained, and they left a power vacuum filled by English nobles. Reports vary, and the numbers are in dispute, but the high number is that English forces had 30,000 captured Irish and Spanish soldiers. Other sources say half that number, around 15,000, were engaged, with 7,000 to 8,000 being captured. The Spanish allies were allowed to leave, but not the Irish. In 1603 or 1604, King James I of England, crowned on March 23, 1603, reportedly issued the order of banishment. This allowed those Irish captured to be sold, a permanent banishment. After nearly a decade, the king gave permission for the English Governor-General to collect and sell the captured Irish soldiers as slaves and send them to the New World in the Americas. In 1612, the first recorded Irish slaves were sold, possibly to the Portuguese, and taken to the Amazon River Basin, in their colony in modern-day Brazil. This brought them to the New World. There has been some dispute as to whether these people were indentured servants or slaves, but it is clear that they were forced out of Ireland to the New World, so it seems illogical and ridiculous to assume that they went voluntarily, hence the status of slaves. It has been chronicled that in 1625, James I's son, Charles I, issued the decree, and it may be possible before his death in March 1625, but given the timeline on James's death, it would appear that his son, Charles, probably did issue the royal decree authorizing the Irish slaves. This included prisoners captured, those deemed to be common criminals, and rabble-rousers who were sold. They were to become the property of the English plantation owners in the North American colonies. As a result, tens of thousands of Irish men and women were sent to the Eastern American colonies, as well as Guyana, Antigua, and Montserrat. As well, between 1629 and 1632, as other Caribbean locations over the next few decades were infiltrated, but the exact number may never be known. By 1637, approximately 69% of the population of Montserrat were Irish.
Think about that. Is that amazing or what? The whole damn Americas were built up by slaves, and a huge amount of Irish slaves.
Many were indentured servants, yet some were slaves. The rationale was simple. Black slaves had to be purchased at a cost of around 20 to 50 pounds sterling, a huge sum of money in those days. However, Irish slaves were sold for 900 pounds of cotton per person, but also traded for tobacco and indigo in a straight barter system. It would appear that the Irish then became the largest source of slaves for English slave traders and plantation owners at that time, far surpassing the African slave trade until the early to mid-1700s.
Well, how about that? So you black people aren't the only creators on the planet, huh?
Between 1641, during the Irish Rebellion, to 1652, it has been stated that over 550,000 Irish were killed by English forces, and 300,000 more were sold as slaves, mostly military-aged men.
So you wonder why, like, the Irish have kind of, that kind of grudge against the English. If you ever wondered why that might be, that's where it comes from. So of course, it's the same thing with the blacks. You have to say, look, that was like way in the past, so things have to change, and you can't just dig up that past and then go around hating the English. That's not what we're saying here, right? But it is kind of strange when you have black people. That's why Irish people don't take much shit from black people, and they shouldn't, okay? They just shouldn't take any shit from them whatsoever, because of that history here.
Their children, especially women and girls, were sold and considered quite valuable in the domestic service roles. The greatest perpetrator of this was Oliver Cromwell, who defeated Charles I in 1649 during the English Civil War and had him executed. Cromwell, as Lord Protector, waged a ruthless war against the Irish, starting in 1649. By 1650, it is claimed that nearly 29,000 Irish were sold to planters in St. Kitts. During the decade of the 1650s, it is also claimed, as well as disputed, that around 100,000 Irish children, generally from 10 to 14 years of age, were taken from their parents and were also sold, and sold themselves also as slaves or indentured servants in the West Indies, Virginia, the Carolinas, and New England.
Yeah, because, a lot of Irish people wanted to leave Ireland because, there was a lot of starvation, the famine, and so on. And it wasn't just that little time span where the famine was like the worst. It was always very hard because of all those occupations and all those wars and all the rest of that, for the Irish to kind of settle down in a way and have an economy of its own and so on. So it was really hard to survive. So lots of people wanted to get into the new lands, which would have been the Americas. And so some of them actually sold themselves into slavery, or they, I think the first 7 years when they were there, they would work for the people that brought them over.
It is also claimed that between 1651 and 1660, the Irish slaves far outnumbered the colonists in all areas. In 1652, Cromwell ordered that 12,000 Irish were to be sold to Barbados, and those numbers are not in dispute, only their status. On 1 May 1654, his "To Hell or to Connaught" proclamation was issued during the Act of Settlement of 1662. This was when the English began confiscating all Irish-held lands, and the native Irish were relocated west of the Shannon River. Those who resisted were sent to the West Indies as slaves or executed. His own words proclaimed, quote, "Those who fail to transplant themselves into Connaught or County Clare within 6 months shall be attainted of high treason, or to be sent to America or other parts beyond the seas. Those banished who return ought to suffer the pains of death as felons by virtue of this act without benefit of clergy." End quote. The English could kill the Irish without penalty, but selling them offered great profit. It is claimed that over 80,000 more Irish were sold, with 52,000 going to the colonies of Barbados and Virginia, but again we cannot verify the exact numbers. Many argue that these were indentured servants, not slaves, yet there are no records of contracts between those forcibly removed and their benefactors. One may assume that, given the barter system of using tobacco and cotton as a trade item for workers, that these deported Irish were, in fact, slaves. In 1656, the Council of State ordered the roundup of 1,000 Irish girls and 1,000 Irish boys in their early teens, even some children, to be rounded up and sold to Jamaican planters. These numbers...
Interesting, but they weren't slaves. Of course they weren't slaves. They were just, they were just kind of workers, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? They weren't, because they weren't all slaves, but not all black people were slaves either, and we had black slave owners. So, shove it.
Are in dispute, but do seem reasonable, as these would be children whose parents were already deported. Part of this order was an edict passed on October 2nd, 1665, which stated, quote, "Upon report of Committee for America concerning proposals for transporting persons from Long Island to Jamaica, to confer with the Committee for Jamaica," end quote. The persons were Irish, and no indentured servant would be released to go to Jamaica. These had to be forcibly exported Irish, who were already present in New York. In fact, some of the English receiving these Irish slaves seemed rather concerned, hence this following report.
You could also argue that the blacks weren't slaves, they were property. So you bought them, so what the hell?
Quote, "Commission appointing Cornelius Holland, Colonel Owen Rowe, Sir Thomas Roth, and 14 others accompany, by the name of the Governor and Company of the City of London, for the plantation of the Somers Islands, to take into consideration the present condition of those plantations, many well-affected persons there having been much oppressed and unjustly dealt with in relation to matters of conscience." End quote.
Oh my God. Years and years and decades later, then they would have some conscience, right? Have you ever seen the film Gangs of New York? Quite an amazing movie. Then you'd see a lot of the shit that went down with the Irish.
Whitehall, 1653, June 28th. This situation, with the forcibly removed Irish not being a people to take subjugation lightly, appeared to have created the fear of an uprising, and this seems to be explained in the Whitehall document from November 18, 1656. Quote, "The Council of State to Captain Wilkinson. Importance of the Somers Islands to the interest of the Commonwealth. Supposition that the Spaniards will endeavor to get a footing there. Doubtful that a principle of disaffection may yet be retained by some of the inhabitants. He is encouraged to attend to his duties as commander of the fort, to keep a vigilant eye upon the malignant and discontented party, that they may have the less opportunity to prejudice the island's safety, and to use his best endeavors to secure the interest of the Commonwealth." End quote. This referred to the Irish population that must have been slaves, and they feared an uprising. No reason to worry about indentured servants.
No.
So, whether one accepts the reality of Irish slavery or not, the fact remains that there were Irish people forced into slavery. However, the exact numbers may never be known. We hope you enjoyed this segment of Forgotten History. Please click like and subscribe for free. And please stay tuned and be engaged and informed. Send us comments if you have questions or even show ideas, and we will respond to all requests and comments as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thanks, man. That was good. That was well done. And very informative. And there was a reason why I took this into account now, because we were with the black slaves and how the whole thing happened with the black slaves, and what was going on, and that white people didn't even go inland. They didn't want to go in there because they wouldn't survive longer than a year, and stuff like that. So now we come to an excerpt from the book Black Rednecks and White Liberals from Thomas Sowell. And here he talks about, like, he tries to explain to us what he means by the term black rednecks. Because now you've had the Irish being pulled over to Americas and sold there, and you have the black slaves being pulled over and sold, and obviously later on you had even Chinese slaves, kind of slaves, and everything was done like that, okay? Thousands of years all over the world. But then some strange thing happened in America, because, like, where do you have people, looking for reparations and crying about slavery hundreds of years ago? Where? Do the Germans complain about it? The Italians? The Spaniards? Who complains about it? Except the black people. And how did that happen? What happened there? And I think that this kind of little excerpt here might help us to understand a bit of that, which is quite something. I like this guy, Thomas Sowell. He made a lot of things clear through his lifetime. He was a liberal before he then became Republican, when he saw what the hell was going on and how the liberals lie like nobody else. Okay, let's have a look into this then.
There's a lie being pushed in America, and Thomas Sowell cracked it wide open. See, the mainstream narrative says all outcomes in black communities come down to systemic racism and the legacy of slavery. And yet, when you pull the curtain back, Sowell shows us something deeper, something more uncomfortable, something more liberating. Let's get one thing straight. Sowell isn't disrespecting black people. He's liberating them from the trap of pity, the trap of white guilt, the trap of assuming that every dysfunction has a white cause behind it and never a cultural or behavioral origin. Now here's the twist. Sowell says that what many see as authentic black culture, the street talk, the violence, the disdain for education, the hypermasculinity, is not African. It's not even uniquely black. It's inherited, but not from Africa.
Amazing. So all this stupid street talk, as he said there, right? This not being able to talk properly. They go to the same damn schools, and then they have this strange accent or something, you know, this kind of weird accent kind of thing. Nobody has that accent anywhere in the world. Okay, they just invented it. And they insist on talking like that and sounding as stupid as that. And that's not African at all, and it's not even black.
From a certain segment of white America, the poor, rural, violent, anti-intellectual Scotch-Irish culture of the South. He calls it the culture of the black redneck.
Because, as we just had, the Irish were enslaved. The Scottish were too, to some degree. And then they, obviously, they weren't very educated and so on. And because education and all of that seemed to be something that the slavers did, people started, you know, rebelling against being educated and stuff in that direction.
And it's not genetic, it's not racial, it's cultural. Adopted, absorbed, and passed down in black ghettos because of historical proximity and shared geography. Let that sink in. What we often call ghetto behavior didn't come from slavery. It came from poor white southern redneck culture, a culture that was once ridiculed across the nation for its backwardness, its broken English, its hostility to schooling, its impulsive violence, and its chaos. That culture wasn't praised when it was white.
Ah, I see. So when it was white, when white people behave like that, it's not praised, it's looked down upon. It's like, you know, that's not cool.
So why is it protected now that it's seen as black?
Now that's a good question.
That's where the second half of Sowell's title hits, white liberals. Sowell accuses white liberals of doing something devastating, romanticizing dysfunction when it appears in minority groups, making excuses, weaponizing empathy, preserving destructive behaviors under the mask of cultural authenticity.
There's a good reason for that, you see, because if you don't have that, if you let people just, you know, be normally educated, rather than praising them for their idiotic ways, right? If you let them just work and build up their own thing, and not necessarily separate from the whites, just their own thing, right? Each person builds up their own life kind of thing. If you just let them do that, there will be no need anymore for the Democratic Party. Because the Democratic Party is nothing else but a complainer party. Because the only thing that they do is promise to make things better for minorities. But if you give those minorities just simply the opportunity, go ahead, work for your thing, do your thing as everybody else does, you know, and you put them in prison just as much as the other person because they do bad things or they do crime, then you wouldn't need the Democratic Party anymore.
So instead of helping poor black communities rise out of chaos, these liberal elites turn failure into identity. They call it culture.
Wow.
They call it oppression. They call it keeping it real. And instead of encouraging transformation, they protect self-destruction.
Wow.
What Sowell dares to say is this: culture matters, behavior matters, history matters, but not in the way you've been told. This is the conversation nobody wants to have, because it doesn't sell pity, it doesn't flatter guilt, it demands accountability from everyone. If culture is learned, not inherited, then transformation is always possible. That's the real threat Sowell poses to the status quo.
Exactly. Because if it's just a thing that you learned from somebody else, you can unlearn that or just learn something new. It's not something that's inherent in you. It's not something that is passed on through your DNA, you know?
Because once you admit that the street culture glamorized in films, music, and even classrooms didn't come from Africa or slavery, but from poor, dysfunctional white Southern culture.
Again, black people copying white people. And in this case, copying the worst of whites, right? Amazing.
Then suddenly, you're forced to admit something dangerous. It can be unlearned. It isn't sacred, it's not destiny, it's not blackness, it's baggage. See, the real insult to black America isn't racism. It's low expectations. It's the liberal lie that says, this is just how they are, don't it?
Wow. No, I'd like to hear that again. I'm sorry, but like, it's just too good to let it fly.
It can be unlearned. It isn't sacred, it's not destiny, it's not blackness, it's baggage. See, the real insult to black America isn't racism. It's low expectations. It's the liberal lie that says, this is just how they are, don't expect more. That lie keeps power in the hands of those who profit off failure, activists, politicians, and media outlets selling victimhood like its identity. But here's what Sowell lays out, backed by brutal facts. Before the 1960s, black communities were making real strides, faster than white liberals want you to remember. Black labor force participation was higher than white labor force participation.
This is something that Jesse Lee Peterson always says. He's always saying that the black family was, was tight. They were Christian. They were hardworking, and the black people were just rising up. Not in the sense of they were trying to revolt or anything. They were just rising up out of this whole, past of slavery and all the rest of that. They were becoming just simple, normal people, right? It's quite something. And they stayed together. Divorce rate was really low, and man and woman stayed together.
Two-parent households were the norm.
There you go, that's the one I mean. Two-parent households. So let's go back here. Yep.
Two-parent households were the norm. Literacy was climbing. Business ownership was spreading. Crime far lower than it became after the so-called Great Society. So what happened? The elite stepped in. Government subsidies, welfare dependency, progressive education, and worst of all, the glamorization of the worst traits in the name of racial authenticity. Instead of encouraging values that built progress, discipline, education, work ethic, liberals elevated rebellion, resentment, and rage. They handed black Americans a blueprint for permanent protest instead of upward mobility. They created a system where failure was proof of oppression, and success was acting white.
Amazing, right? Success is acting white. Punctuality is white. Mathematics is white. All the rest of that. And white is bad, by the way. Even though they want nothing else, nothing more than to be white. Because, they act like white people. They copied, the worst of the white. And the ones that didn't want to be educated, that couldn't speak English properly, and acted like a pack of fucking morons. And they copied them.
Sowell's not saying black folks are doomed. He's saying they were sabotaged. Sabotaged by false friends in high places, by white liberals who needed black struggle to justify their own political relevance.
Yes, and that's why, the Republicans are so bad, because they're saying, look, you're under the same law as everybody else. You get the same rights as everybody else. And they see that as something bad. They see it as an insult to get the same rights as everybody else.
Who protected chaos by calling it culture, who handed out checks instead of freedom, who buried real history to replace it with a myth, one where black destiny is controlled entirely by white people, past or present. And here's the craziest part. This cultural baggage isn't limited to black people. The same dysfunction that gripped the South, violence, honor culture, illiteracy, impulsiveness, once affected poor whites just as badly. But no one protected it. No one romanticized it. And over time, much of it faded away.
Yes.
What Sowell reveals is simple. Cultural pathology doesn't need protection. It needs correction. But correction takes truth. And truth is offensive when your whole identity is built on a lie.
Whoa. Okay. This is good.
This book is not a condemnation. It's a wake-up call. Sowell isn't saying black Americans are inherently broken. He's saying they've been sold a broken culture and then told its treasure. Now dig deeper, because Sowell doesn't stop at American ghettos. He zooms out and shows how the same liberal patterns play out globally. Around the world, Sowell saw a repeating cycle. A group struggles, culture clashes with modern expectations, and instead of being challenged to adapt, they get coddled by elites who call it respecting diversity. That's not compassion, that's sabotage. In country after country, group after group, the real key to progress wasn't cash, it wasn't protest, it was cultural reform. Embracing habits and norms that allowed people to function in a modern economy. Punctuality, literacy, savings, long-term planning, conflict resolution. This isn't about race, it's about readiness. So when Sowell looks at American cities flooded with government money, programs, and pity, and yet sees rising dysfunction, he knows what's wrong. You can't fix broken culture with free stuff. And here's where it gets even harder to swallow. Many of the most successful black Americans in history didn't grow up in the so-called black redneck culture. They were raised in urban environments with different values, different accents, and a hunger for education.
There you go.
Many were closer in culture to Jews, Irish, or Italian immigrants than to poor rural Southerners. So ask yourself, why is that culture erased? Why are the success stories buried while the dysfunction is amplified and defended? Because it doesn't serve the narrative. Because independence ruins dependency. Because black success not rooted in rebellion challenges the activist industrial complex.
Wow. You see, they want to keep their slaves. This is the thing about Democrats. They're the liars and they're the hypocrites, right? They're all about, oh, how bad slavery was, but they want to keep their slaves. They want to keep them on the plantation, the blacks. So that's why they want to keep them dependent. Now, I have nothing against government programs at all, by the way. At all. I'm not against that at all. The thing is, though, that they should be built in a certain way so that as soon as you want to rise out of that, you can. Okay? So, you know, how it's a good thing to be welcomed, but it's weird if they can't let you go. You see?
It reveals the lie, that the system is completely to blame, that behavior doesn't matter, that culture is untouchable. Sowell shows us this truth. You can change your reality by changing your culture. But to do that, you have to stop protecting the parts of your identity that are pulling you down. The street code, the glorified violence, the anti-education attitude, that's not power, that's a performance.
That's stupidity. That's acting like a damn monkey. And that's why we call them like that. That's why people look at it like that. Because it's like monkey behavior.
A script handed down from poor, violent, uneducated white Southerners centuries ago. It didn't help them win. It won't help now. Sowell was born into poverty. No father.
Sowell, not Saul.
Raised in Harlem. But he rejected the redneck template. He read. He worked. He thought. He challenged everything. Even the civil rights movement's sacred cows. And that's what really scares the establishment. A black man who doesn't need their permission to tell the truth.
Whoa. He's knocking out some really good truths here, isn't he? That's just like this thing. Amazing.
He goes further. He exposes how white liberals will use history to explain failure, but never to explain success. They'll tell you slavery explains black poverty, but they won't tell you how millions of immigrants who came to America with nothing, facing discrimination, language barriers, and violence, still built businesses, families, and legacies. They'll talk about oppression, but they won't explain why West Indian immigrants, black people from the Caribbean, often outperformed native-born black Americans in education and income. Same skin, different culture. They'll scream about racism, but they won't explain why Chinese immigrants, once violently excluded, mocked, and murdered, rose to dominate in education and business. Why? Because culture shatters the victimhood narrative. Because if success is possible through values, choices, and discipline, then the whole structure built around permanent outrage collapses.
Wow. Boy, boy, boy. I love this guy. And more of it, please. You know, liberals are just the last assholes on the planet. Those are the last disgusting motherfuckers on the planet. And nobody has use for them. I mean, look, it's the same thing with, like, when you do videos on YouTube or whatever. You know, if you don't go along with the narrative, your videos are not going to get anywhere whatsoever. Which, you know, I don't really care because I'm just doing this. I'm doing this for fun. But the point is, like, have a look at people who talk the talk the way the liberals want it, the way the globalists want it. If they weren't such assholes, right, and they were so, how would you say, power hungry, they would hide it a little. You know, they wouldn't be so stupid and show it, so that we all know that the only place that we can actually talk properly and say what we need to say and want to say is on X. Because Elon Musk bought the damn thing to take it away from the liberals. And then they use the word liberal, of course, which means freedom, by the way, right? They're the most Nazi people on the planet. The liberals are the Nazis, just for your information.
And that's bad for business, bad for academia, bad for politicians who thrive on grievance. So instead, they promote a model of justice that protects bad behavior and condemns anyone, black or white, who dares to say, we can do better.
Imagine, and that's what's going on in Europe right now with the Muslims and all the black people that they've imported, that they all need to go back home.
Sowell makes it plain. The fight isn't black versus white, it's truth versus comfort, progress versus pity, dignity versus dependency. And the question is, which side are you on? Let's zoom in on one of the most disturbing examples: education. For Sowell, nothing symbolizes the betrayal of black potential more than what happened to education in the inner cities. Once upon a time, black schools, yes, even under segregation, had discipline, order, and standards. Teachers demanded excellence. Parents expected results. Students learned. But then came the new wave of liberalism. Integration became the goal, but not on merit. Instead of strengthening black schools, they weakened standards across the board. Disciplinary policies changed. Expectations dropped. Excuses multiplied. And when black students began falling behind, guess what they blamed? Not the shift in culture, not the erosion of standards, but
Let me guess, white people?
racism.
Oh, racism.
Not racism from the outside, but from anyone who expected more. The tragic result: generations of black youth taught that excellence is betrayal, that order is oppression, that achievement is acting white. It's psychological warfare disguised as progress. And while they preached equity, they produced entropy. They gave students feelings instead of facts, affirmation instead of accountability. They removed consequences, ignored discipline, and called chaos freedom.
Wow.
The outcome? Black students trapped in systems that no longer educate and told it's someone else's fault. Sowell doesn't accept that. He shows that when black students are placed in schools that maintain standards, like charter schools, Catholic schools, or strict public academies, they thrive.
Yeah, and the thing that I'm hearing right now is you want to be careful with this stuff as well, because Sowell isn't saying this so that you can make yourself a victim once again, right? A victim of the liberals. I mean, there is such thing as your own brain. I mean, why did Thomas Sowell free himself out of this? He had no father at home, and he was in a poor family, and he got all that shit shoved down his throat. There isn't a component in there of wanting to be a victim and wanting that to be the case, right? So they get away with fucking murder. And just as we had with the Carmelo Anthony case, like black people fucking losing their shit because of the fact that they put him into jail and they put him away in prison for like 35 years for the murder of somebody else.
When culture shifts, outcomes shift. But here's what the liberal elite fear most: proof that behavior and values matter more than government programs. Because if that's true, their entire identity, built on being saviors, crumbles. They don't want black independence. They want perpetual struggle, because struggle is profitable. But Sowell calls their bluff and hands the keys back to the individual. You want to fix poverty? Then fix the culture. That's Sowell's message. And that means doing something radical, holding a mirror up to the community, not to shame it, but to wake it up.
Well, yeah, I mean, just take a look in the mirror, take a look at what you're doing. You know, the way you're ruining everything. Everywhere where black people turn up, everybody else can go home. They could just go home. It's going to be a ghetto. It's going to, you know, there's going to be violence. There's going to be dirt. There's going to be fucking, what do they call it, dance. There's going to be twerking. There's just going to be shouting and screaming and bullying around the place. Get out of here.
Sowell makes it clear. This isn't about white people saving black people. This is about black people reclaiming their power by rejecting the dead weight. That includes the glorification of ignorance, the elevation of thugs as heroes, the defense of failure as oppression. That includes rejecting the idea that low standards are a form of love. They're not, they're poison. True love challenges, it disciplines, it demands better. Sowell reminds us, every successful community in history had to go through this. The Irish weren't always respected. The Italians weren't always rich. The Jews weren't always accepted. Each group had to cut ties with parts of their culture that held them back.
And think about the Germans. Think about the Germans. I mean, they're being bullied around now, you know, before the wars and after the wars and during the wars. And they're not respected, even though some of the great things that they have achieved, you know? Yeah, the Germans have to throw all that stuff out, all those people out, and all those who want to influence our our economy, our politics, and so on. And the Germans have to stand on their own 2 feet as Germans and fix their culture.
Alcoholism, violence, illiteracy, corruption. They didn't whine, they evolved. And that's the secret the liberal elite want to keep buried. Culture is not a cage, it's a choice. And it can change. But that change starts with truth. And the truth is, the ghetto mindset is not heritage, it's sabotage. The idea that toughness is measured in aggression, that intelligence is weakness, that women are disposable, that fatherhood is optional, none of that is power. It's a performance of pain passed off as identity. And if we keep protecting it, romanticizing it or blaming it on long-dead plantation owners, it'll eat another generation alive.
Yeah, the performance of pain, not any pain at all, because none of these black people suffered slavery. None of them, okay? Yeah, it's a generational thing. Well, then it would be the same for everybody else as well. And if you can be assholes because you were slaves once, then we have the reason just as much as you do, because we were all slaves too. So shut the fuck up.
You know what real oppression looks like? It looks like being told your future is out of your hands. It looks like schools that won't punish violence because it's part of the culture. It looks like politicians who only show up to cry with you, but never build with you. It looks like being told you can't by people who look just like you and who call you a sellout when you do. That's not liberation. That's a cage with golden bars, and Thomas Sowell kicks that cage open. He says, stop romanticizing rage. Stop defending failure. Stop outsourcing your future to people who need you broken to feel virtuous.
Amazing.
You want real power? Then take back the narrative, reclaim excellence, celebrate families, build institutions, defend order, demand more. Because the world doesn't owe you success. It only respects results. Sowell dismantles every sacred cow in the liberal playbook, and he doesn't flinch. He calls out black leaders who preach outrage but live in gated communities.
Yes, amazing. In gated communities, because they don't want the violence and the crap in their own fucking community, do they? Amazing.
He exposes the damage done by white saviors who protect dysfunction like it's art.
And those white saviors are Democrats, okay? Liberals, Democrats.
He attacks the lie that government can replace fatherhood. And he reminds us, true dignity doesn't come from how much you suffered, it comes from how much you overcame. There's a reason this book shook people. It didn't say what they wanted to hear. It said what they needed to hear. Because when Sowell wrote Black Rednecks and White Liberals, he wasn't just writing history, he was sounding an alarm. He warned us what would happen if we continued defending chaos in the name of culture. He showed us how white liberals created systems that treat black Americans like museum pieces, frozen in time, frozen in trauma, frozen in 1965. No growth, no agency, no accountability. They turned the black past into a permanent script and handed it out in schools, music, news, politics. And if you dare rewrite that script, they label you a threat, a traitor, an enemy of the people. But here's what Sowell shows with hard data and deeper insight. Black progress happened when values, not pity, led the way.
Imagine that.
When families were strong, when churches upheld discipline, when communities valued education, order, and ambition, not when government handed out checks and social theories. The more we tried to help with liberal engineering, the worse it got. Because it wasn't help, it was control.
But there's another thing, though, that you need to understand, I think, and that is that you can't just take away the checks and then say, go work. That doesn't work. What they do is to keep them caged. They give them the check and then hinder them to go educate themselves and so on, right? So if you have both, it would work. You would create a road, because this is what I find with the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats build a road before the bridge, right? But they don't build a bridge, and the Republicans build the road after the bridge, but they don't build a bridge. You see what I'm saying? So both of them are kind of building something, and it looks like something is happening, but they don't have the bridge so that you can get from one place to another. You see what I'm saying? They don't open up the doors so that people can go educate themselves and actually become something and work on something. No, they want to take the money away from those people now, right? That are getting some sort of substance, some sort of, let's say, support from the government. They want to take the government support away and say, go work. Yeah, you're just the same fucking slavers as the other ones, right? And why don't you just build the whole damn road so that people can walk that road and become something, whatever it is that they want to become? No, you won't. You won't do that, will you? Because then you're not going to be the one in power, and you can't be the one that chooses for them. It's ridiculous. You're all a pack of assholes.
And every generation lost to that lie became evidence that the system was working. Not to uplift, but to keep certain people in power by keeping others in pain. The biggest crime? Turning victimhood into virtue. Sowell exposes how entire industries now thrive off black struggle, while punishing any attempt to fix it. Try to reform education, you're a sellout. Preach family values, you're respectability politics. Promote capitalism and ownership, now you're the enemy.
Of course you are. Of course you are. Because you don't want them to own anything. That's what I mean with not building a bridge so that you can go take the path on the other side and keep going. No, and the other side is not building the path on the bridge so that they don't actually get there, right? So they don't make it possible so that you can work in a factory forever and rent, but can't buy, as you see with the governments that are doing it, that are going on now, right? The capitalists will always bring it to such an extent that they have lots of workers that can't actually own anything. The government doesn't want you to own anything. That's what I'm saying, be it left or be it right. As I say, they're all fucking globalists, they're all a pack of assholes, and if anything has to change, it's going to have to be the culture that doesn't vote these people into power anymore, and that just simply, does something to get rid of these elites. How do you do that? Well, people will have to think of something.
The message is clear. Stay in your place, stay angry, stay broken, but never ever succeed on your own terms, because if you do, the whole house of cards falls. The non-profits go broke. The grievance hustlers lose relevance. The politicians have to find a new crisis. So the system is designed to protect pain. But pain is not identity. Struggle is not a crown. And slavery is not a lifelong pass.
And it's over, okay? And if you want to stop slavery, you're going to have to go to those people who are you're lifting up. You have to go to the black people, to the people in Africa, and you have to go to people like the Muslims and so on, right? You're going to have to talk to other people, those people who are lifting up as minorities in our countries, whereas in fact they're not, they're majorities in the world. Throw them out, let them shit in the bush.
Sowell's book rips the mask off and tells Black America, you're not less, you're not doomed, but you are being played. And if you want to win, you need new rules. Not rules from the elites, not rules from Washington, not rules written in protest slogans, but timeless principles. Earn what you want, own what you build, lead your home, question the script, think for yourself. Here's what Sowell knew. The most dangerous idea in the world is not racism, it's false compassion. Because false compassion is what lets a system rot from within, while calling it justice. It's what lets brilliant black kids fall through the cracks, because holding them to high standards is insensitive. It's what floods neighborhoods with government cash, but robs them of purpose. It's what cries over injustice, but never builds anything stronger in its place. And worst of all, it's what turns the past into a weapon against the future. Sowell rejects all of it. He says, we are not defined by slavery, we are not defined by oppression, we are defined by what we do next. His message is bold, it's controversial, it's uncomfortable, but it's free. Free from the script, free from the guilt, free from the dependency. He's not asking for permission to speak. He's giving Black America permission to think again, to lead, to break the trance.
And I'm giving you all permission. If he's just giving Black America permission, I'm giving all of you permission. The Germans in Germany, the Irish in Ireland, the English in England, the Scottish in Scotland, and the French in France, and so on. I'm giving you all permission to think for yourself and to take back your countries. And then you send those blacks home, by the way, and then they can see how they do it with their own country, because they have a lot of stuff to handle in their own country. And there they don't have to be victims of white people, okay? Because I do really like what he's saying. In America, it's a different story because of this mixed culture. But you can see in America this multicultural thing isn't working, okay? And because it's just, they're going to use this all the time. And it's, why do they bring in these people? Because they want, it's the power of the minorities. So you can always talk about the poor minority. The killing and raping and stabbing and robbing minority. Okay? Throw them out. Throw them the fuck out. But I mean, what he's saying here is absolutely for real. It's the liberals. It's the Democrats. It's the far left that are doing this. It's the infiltration of a capitalist society where they want everything to break down so they can be the saviors and take over the government.
Stop playing the victim in someone else's movie and start writing a new story. One built on truth, on action, on values, on pride that isn't performative but earned. Sowell's not here to be liked, he's here to liberate. And liberation starts with this: the culture you inherit is not the culture you must keep. So choose wisely.
Wow. I mean, yes. By the way, there's lots of stuff from Thomas Sowell, and he says an awful lot of very cool things about black culture and culture in general, and about the liberals and how they take over a society. It is very, very important. Sorry about that. And yeah, so we can see what's going on here, right? The way they infiltrate. I remember this Russian guy, maybe I get that video at some stage as well, how he described how they, communism slowly takes over a country, how backward and disgusting it actually is, right? The way they use minorities and pity parties to infiltrate everything. Because, you can't say anything against a poor black guy, right? Look at the poor guy. You can't say anything against that. You can't say anything against women. Sure, women are weaker, but at the same time, they're much stronger and just as strong as men and all the rest of that. It is a shit show, a complete shit show. But I think that because of the thing that I did last week with we did at MonstaCast, we had it, it kind of triggered something in me to say, look, we're going to have to tackle the subject of slavery and to just simply say black people weren't the only slaves ever, okay? In fact, you were just a little part of slavery in the history of slavery in the world, and it wasn't blacks. Black are still enslaving one another. You're just liars, okay? You people are liars all the way through. And there was people who are telling you, oh, you poor black, you poor little black person, let us, help you along, be a criminal, and then we let you off and all the rest of that. I'm not doing you any favors whatsoever. And as always, one of these things and one of these days, all of that was going to change, and it's going to be a shit show. It's going to be terrible for you guys because of the fact that we have it all on video. It's not like history where people can change shit. We have it on video. Oh, the police are always, beating down on black people, and they're always, they're killing them and beating them and all the rest of that. And then we have body cams, and now we have a look at body cam footage, and we see what's going on. How black people act with police and so on. How they just escalate every situation. It is just absolutely crazy. The same thing with women, liberal women. How crazy they are. Fucking stupid bitches. It's amazing. And then you're not supposed to be saying it. Of course, I'm not supposed to say that. That's why this video is going to have, 10 views or something? Who gives a damn? Who gives a fuck? We're just going to keep it going. But anyway, I hope this was entertaining. I hope that was enough information. Nicely packed together there. And we will see you next week. So all that's left to say is God bless you all. Till next time. Bye-bye.